We're leaving. Now. Kevin's words slashed through the rooftop party's buzz. Brianna's smile froze, her face aflame with a humiliation so raw it chilled her bones as her husband dragged her from her colleagues. Her long, wavy hair swayed with each forced step, the glow of Chicago's elite fading into a suffocating hush. Kevin thought he was shielding his marriage from a stranger's glance, oblivious that his jealous rage played out before Edward Vance, the party's guest of honor and Brianna's powerful new boss. Edward's kindness in the aftermath would unmask a betrayal far crueler than any public scene, upending Brianna's world and revealing her unyielding strength. Join our Storytime family, subscribe and share where you're listening from, city or vibe. The Chicago skyline glittered like a crown of stars, its lights reflecting off the glass walls of the rooftop penthouse where Sterling and Wright architecture hosted its gala. Brianna, 29, stood near the edge of the crowd, her long, wavy hair catching the breeze as she clutched a glass of sparkling water. The air buzzed with the chatter of the city's elite, architects, investors, and power players. All white, their tailored suits and sleek dresses a uniform of privilege. As the only black woman at her level in the firm, Brianna felt the weight of every glance, every whispered judgment. Tonight was no ordinary event. It was the launch of the Aura Eco Resort, the firm's most ambitious project yet, and her chance to prove she belonged. She had prepared meticulously, rehearsing her pitch for weeks, her voice steady as she described sustainable materials and bold, earthy aesthetics to a silver-haired investor named Harold. His nods were measured, but his eyes lit up when she mentioned biophilic design principles. "That's innovative," he said, leaning closer. "You've got a vision." Brianna's chest swelled with quiet pride. For the first time that night, she felt the room's invisible walls, those barriers of race and expectation, begin to crack. She smiled, her words flowing with confidence, unaware of the storm approaching. Across the rooftop, Kevin, 32, pushed through the crowd, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with something raw and unguarded. He'd arrived uninvited, his presence unannounced even to Brianna. He'd been at home stewing over her late nights at the office, her new confidence that seemed to eclipse him. Seeing her now, laughing lightly with Harold, her hand gesturing animatedly, something snapped. To Kevin, it wasn't networking. It was a betrayal, a stranger's attention stealing what was his. He didn't pause to greet anyone, didn't notice the clinking glasses or the jazz quartet's soft hum. His world had narrowed to Brianna, and the fire in his chest demanded action. "Brianna!" His voice cut through the chatter like a blade. Heads turned. Her smile froze, the warmth draining from her face as she saw him storming toward her. Harold stepped back, his brow furrowing. "What are you doing?" Kevin demanded, his tone loud enough to draw eyes from every corner. "You're making me look like a fool." Brianna's breath caught, her fingers tightening around her glass. "Kevin, please," she whispered, her voice trembling but urgent. "Not here." He didn't listen. His hand clamped onto her arm, firm and unyielding, pulling her away from Harold, away from the circle of colleagues who now stood silent, their conversations dead. The jazz faltered, a saxophone note lingering awkwardly. Brianna stumbled slightly, her heels catching on the polished floor, her long, wavy hair swaying as she tried to keep her balance. "You're embarrassing me," Kevin hissed, his voice carrying a venom she hadn't heard in public before. "Laughing like that, flirting with him. Do you think I'm blind?" "Kevin, stop," she pleaded, her voice low, her eyes darting to the faces around her. Colleagues, investors, all watching, their expressions a mix of shock and pity. Her face burned, a humiliation so sharp it felt cold, like ice settling into her bones. She tried to pull her arm free, but his grip tightened, dragging her toward the glass-paneled elevator. The crowd parted, their silence louder than any whisper. Brianna's heart pounded, each step stripping away the confidence she'd built, exposing her to the room's unrelenting gaze. Then a voice boomed over the speakers, smooth and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest of honor, the visionary behind the Aura project, Edward Vance." The crowd stirred, a ripple of applause breaking the tension. Brianna glanced back, her eyes locking with Edward's. He stood at the center of the rooftop, 49, his presence magnetic, his gaze steely and unreadable. He'd seen everything. Kevin's outburst, her humiliation, the raw unraveling of her carefully crafted poise. His expression held no warmth, only a calculating stillness that made her stomach twist. She didn't know what he thought, but she knew it mattered. Edward Vance wasn't just her boss. He was the gatekeeper of her future at Sterling and Wright. Kevin didn't stop, pulling her into the elevator as the door slid shut. The last thing she saw was Edward's face, his eyes still fixed on her, a shadow of judgment lingering. The hum of the party faded, replaced by the suffocating quiet of the elevator's descent. Brianna's arm ached where Kevin's fingers had pressed, but the pain in her chest was sharper. She stared at the floor, her mind racing. This wasn't just about tonight. It was about everything. Her ambition, her marriage, the fragile balance she'd fought to maintain. Kevin's jealousy had cracked it all open, and Edward's gaze promised consequences she couldn't yet fathom. As the elevator dinged, opening to the cool Chicago night, Brianna's resolve flickered. She didn't know how, but she would fight to reclaim her place. The city lights stretched before her, vast and unyielding, whispering that this was only the beginning. The morning sun spilled through the kitchen window, casting stark light across the table where Brianna sat, her coffee untouched. Her hands trembled slightly, gripping the mug as if it could anchor her against the memory of last night's rooftop party. The clinking glasses, Kevin's venomous words, the weight of Edward Vance's steely gaze. The humiliation still burned, a cold ache that pulsed with every heartbeat. She stared at the laptop open before her, its screen filled with Aura project notes. But her mind replayed Kevin's grip on her arm, the elevator's suffocating descent, the Chicago skyline mocking her as they fled into the night. She was supposed to be Sterling and Wright's rising star, not a spectacle. Kevin's footsteps broke her thoughts, heavy and deliberate as he entered the kitchen. His face, still taut with the same anger from the party, carried no trace of regret. "You made me look like a fool last night," he said, his voice low but sharp, slicing through the quiet. "Laughing with that investor, acting like I don't exist." Brianna's chest tightened, her fingers curling tighter around the mug. "I was working, Kevin," she said softly, forcing calm into her words. "Networking, it's my job." He scoffed, leaning against the counter, his arms crossed. "Your job? You were flirting, Brianna. Everyone saw it. Don't play innocent." She opened her mouth to argue, to explain that her pitch to Harold had been about biophilic design, not betrayal, but the words caught in her throat. What was the point? Kevin's jealousy had twisted everything, her ambition, her confidence, into a threat. She thought of their early years, when he'd called her his rock, proud of her law school dreams before Zoe's birth shifted her life to motherhood. Now, her return to work, her hard-won role at Sterling and Wright, seemed to unravel him. "I wasn't flirting," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You humiliated me in front of my colleagues. My boss." Kevin's eyes narrowed. "You humiliated me." The argument spiraled, his accusations drowning her defenses, until her phone buzzed, cutting through the tension. A message from the firm. "Meeting with Edward Vance, 10 a.m. Her stomach dropped. Edward, the guest of honor who'd watched her public unraveling, held her future in his hands. She stood, brushing her long, wavy hair behind her shoulder, and grabbed her bag. "I have to go," she said, avoiding Kevin's glare. He didn't respond, but his silence felt like another accusation. At Sterling and Wright's glass-walled office, Brianna sat in the waiting area, her hands clasped tightly over her notebook. The sleek lobby, with its marble floors and modern art, felt like a stage where she was both actor and audience, judged by every passing glance. She'd spent weeks proving herself, her designs for Aura earning quiet praise. But last night's scene threatened to erase it all. Would Edward see her as a liability now? A distraction? Her heart raced as the assistant waved her in. "Mr. Vance is ready." Edward's office was a fortress of power. Mahogany desk, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Chicago skyline, and shelves lined with awards. He sat back in his chair, 49, his presence commanding, despite the calm in his voice. "Brianna, sit," he said, gesturing to a leather chair. She obeyed, her posture rigid, bracing for judgment, but Edward's tone was unexpectedly gentle. I saw what happened last night, he began, his eyes steady but not unkind. I've seen men like your husband try to control talent like yours. It's not uncommon, but you're here because of your skill, Brianna, not his actions. Her breath caught, relief flooding her like warmth after a long winter. She hadn't expected this, empathy from a man whose gaze last night had seemed so cold. Thank you, Mr. Vance, she said, her voice steadying. I'm sorry for the scene. It won't happen again. He raised a hand, dismissing her apology. It's not about apologies. It's about perception. This firm thrives on trust, and last night raised eyebrows. But I believe in you. Edward leaned forward, his voice measured. I want you working directly under me on the Aura project. It's the best way to manage the narrative, to show the firm and our clients that you're focused, capable. You'll report to me, and I'll guide you through this. Brianna's heart lifted, gratitude washing over her. This was a lifeline, a chance to salvage her reputation. I'd be honored, she said, a spark of hope igniting. Edward nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. Good. Let's keep the focus on your work. As she left his office, her steps felt lighter, the weight of last night easing. She didn't see the calculation in Edward's smile, the way his eyes lingered on her retreating figure. She didn't know that his kindness came with strings, that his offer was the first step in a game she hadn't yet learned to play. Back at her desk, she opened her Aura sketches, her resolve hardening. She'd prove herself to Edward, to the firm, to everyone who'd watched her fall apart. But as she traced the lines of her design, a quiet unease stirred. Edward's words echoed, manage the narrative, and something about them felt like a shadow she couldn't yet name. The fluorescent glow of Sterling and Wright's open-plan office bathed Brianna's desk in a sterile light, her laptop screen displaying a half-finished sketch for the Aura Eco Resort. It was late, the hum of Chicago's skyline seeping through the windows, a reminder of the rooftop party 2 weeks ago, where Kevin's outburst had shattered her confidence. Edward Vance's offer to work directly under him had felt like salvation then. His words, "You're here because of your skill," a buoy in the storm of her humiliation. But now, as she traced the lines of her design, a creeping unease settled in her chest. His guidance was starting to feel like a leash. Edward's mentorship had begun with promise. In their first meeting, he'd praised her vision for Aura's sustainable interiors, nodding as she outlined natural textures and solar-integrated lighting. But today, in the firm's glass-walled conference room, his tone shifted. This woven bamboo concept, he said, tapping her sketch with a pen. It's bold, Brianna, but too ambitious. Clients want familiarity, safe elegance, not experiments. She blinked, her fingers tightening around her pencil. It's sustainable and cost-effective, she countered, her voice steady but cautious. It aligns with Aura's eco-ethos. Edward's smile was thin, patronizing. Trust me, I know how this industry plays. Stick to neutral palettes. Let's not risk it. Her stomach twisted, the spark of her original vision dimming under his dismissal. She nodded, swallowing her protest, but each suggestion from Edward felt like a chisel chipping away at her creativity. He'd reframe her ideas in meetings, presenting them as refined versions of his own, while she sat silent, her role reduced to nodding agreement. His words from that first meeting, manage the narrative, echoed in her mind, now laced with a control she hadn't seen coming. She felt like a guest in her own project, her talent caged by his authority. At home, the tension mirrored her work. Kevin's resentment had grown sharper since the party, his accusations a daily ritual. That evening, as Brianna set the table for dinner, Zoe, her 8-year-old daughter, chattered about a school art project, her laughter a fleeting balm. Kevin stormed in, his eyes dark. You're late again, he snapped, ignoring Zoe's smile. Spending all your time with that boss of yours, huh? Brianna's jaw tightened. I was working, Kevin, on Aura. You know that. He laughed bitterly. Working? Or chasing some big-shot dream while I'm stuck here? You've changed, Brianna. You're not the same. She turned away, her long wavy hair falling over her shoulder as she focused on Zoe's plate, shielding her daughter from the venom in his voice. "I'm doing this for us," she said quietly, but the words felt hollow. Kevin's jealousy had twisted her ambition into a wedge between them, just as Edward's guidance was twisting her work into something unrecognizable. She was caught in a vice, her husband's control at home, her boss's dominance at work, each tightening with every step she took toward her dreams. In the office, a flicker of light came unexpectedly. Leo, the 24-year-old intern, lingered after a team meeting, his eyes catching hers as Edward droned on about streamlined designs. Leo had been quiet, his presence unassuming, but now he approached her desk, clutching a folder. "Your bamboo idea," he said softly, glancing around to ensure they were alone. "It was brilliant. I don't get why Edward shot it down." Brianna looked up, surprised by his candor. "It's just how things work here," she said, her voice guarded. Leo shook his head, a spark of defiance in his eyes. "It's not right. Your work stands out. It should be heard." His words, simple but earnest, pierced the fog of her doubt. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen, not as a liability or a wife out of place, but as a designer with something to say. She offered a small smile, her resolve stirring. "Thanks, Leo," she said, her voice soft but firm. He nodded and walked away, leaving her with a flicker of hope. But as she returned to her sketch, Edward's voice echoed from a nearby meeting room, his laughter mingling with a client's. Her hope wavered. Was she fooling herself, thinking she could reclaim her place under his shadow? That night, alone at her desk after hours, Brianna stared at her aura sketch, her original vision, bold and uncompromised. Her fingers traced the lines, a quiet defiance rising in her chest. Edward's control, Kevin's accusations, they were walls but not unbreakable. She didn't know how yet, but she'd find a way to make her voice heard. The Chicago skyline glittered outside, a silent witness to her resolve, as a storm brewed beneath her calm exterior, ready to erupt. The conference room at Sterling and Wright buzzed with anticipation, its glass walls framing the Chicago skyline as the Aura Eco Resort's final presentation loomed. Brianna sat near the back, her notebook open but untouched, her heart a tight knot of hope and dread. For weeks, Edward Vance's mentorship had smothered her creativity, his guidance reducing her bold designs to safe, soulless imitations. Yet she clung to the flicker of defiance sparked by Leo's quiet encouragement. His words, "Your work should be heard," echoing in her mind. She'd poured her soul into Aura's core concept, a biophilic masterpiece blending sustainability and beauty, believing Edward's promise to let her shine. Today, she thought, might be her chance. Edward stood at the front, 49, his presence commanding as he addressed the room, executives, investors, and designers, all white, their eyes fixed on him. "The Aura Project," he began, his voice smooth as polished stone, "is a vision of elegance and innovation." He clicked to the first slide and Brianna's breath caught. There it was, her design, her woven bamboo panels, her solar-integrated lighting, her seamless fusion of nature and luxury. But Edward's words twisted the truth. "This concept," he said, pausing for effect, "is the culmination of my vision, refined over years." The room erupted in applause, colleagues nodding, investors murmuring approval. Brianna froze, her pen slipping from her fingers, clattering softly on the table. Her design, her heart, her late nights, her defiance of every invisible barrier as the only black woman in the room, had been stolen. Edward's smile, sharp and triumphant, cut deeper than Kevin's public outburst at the rooftop party. She sat motionless as the applause washed over her, each clap a hammer against her pride. Her vision, the one Edward had dismissed as too ambitious, now stood as his crowning achievement. The betrayal was a blade, slicing through the trust she'd placed in his kindness after that humiliating night. She wanted to stand, to scream, but her body felt anchored, her voice locked in her throat. The meeting ended in a blur, colleagues congratulating Edward as they filed out. Brianna lingered, her hands trembling as she gathered her notes, her mind replaying his words. She felt like she was back in that elevator, Kevin's grip on her arm, Edward's steely gaze judging her. But this was worse. Her work, her identity, stripped away in front of the firm. As the room emptied, Leo, the 24-year-old intern, approached, his face pale, a folder clutched tightly. "Brianna," he whispered, glancing at the door. "We need to talk, now." They slipped into a quiet corner of the office, the hum of the city muffled by glass. Leo's eyes darted nervously, but his voice was steady. "I found something," he said, opening the folder to reveal archived files. Yellow documents stamped with dates from years ago. "This is Edward's old proposal, rejected by the firm. Look." Brianna's eyes scanned the pages, her pulse quickening. The sketches were crude, a shadow of her own, but the core idea, biophilic elements, natural textures, was unmistakable. "He's been sitting on this for years," Leo said, his voice low. "He saw your work, polished it, and claimed it. He used you." The truth hit like a wave, cold and relentless. Edward's empathy, his offer to manage the narrative, had been a calculated trap. He'd seen her vulnerability after Kevin's scene and exploited it, positioning himself as her savior while stealing her brilliance. The pain was sharper because she'd trusted him, believed his support was a shield against the firm's biases. Her long, wavy hair fell over her shoulder as she leaned back, closing her eyes, the weight of betrayal settling into her bones. But beneath it, something stirred. Anger, raw and unyielding, burning away her doubt. "Thank you, Leo," she said, her voice quiet but firm, a steel edge forming. He nodded, his expression a mix of relief and fear. "I could get in trouble for this," he admitted, "but it's not right. You deserve better." His risk, his defiance, fanned the ember of her resolve. She wasn't just a designer, she was a fighter, and Edward had underestimated her. As Leo left, she sat alone, her fingers tracing the archived sketches, her mind racing. She wouldn't let this stand. She'd reclaim her work, her voice, her place. The Chicago skyline glittered outside, its lights a silent challenge. Brianna's heart pounded, not with fear but with purpose. Edward's betrayal had cracked her world open, but it had also awakened her. She didn't know how yet, but she'd turn his game against him. A plan was forming, sharp and deliberate, waiting to strike. The office lights flickered, casting long shadows across Brianna's desk as she sat alone. The Chicago skyline a distant glow through Sterling and Wright's windows. The sting of Edward Vance's betrayal still burned. His theft of her aura design, a biophilic masterpiece, exposed by Leo's discovery of his old rejected proposal. For weeks, Brianna had felt like a ghost in her own life, her creativity stifled by Edward's control, her home suffocated by Kevin's jealousy. But now the raw anger that had surged in the wake of Edward's presentation fueled her. She wasn't the humiliated woman from the rooftop party anymore, nor the silenced designer under Edward's thumb. She was a strategist, and she was done being played. Brianna leaned back, her long, wavy hair brushing her shoulders as she stared at her laptop screen, a blank canvas for her counterattack. Edward's arrogance and Kevin's predictability were weaknesses she could exploit. She'd feign defeat, let them think her broken, while crafting a trap so precise it would unravel them both. Her fingers moved swiftly, sketching a new aura interior. A stunning atrium with sleek, composite panels, radiant under natural light. It was breathtaking, irresistible, but deliberately flawed. The material, a cutting-edge composite, violated California's Title 24 earthquake safety standards, a detail she knew Edward, in his hubris, would overlook. This was her weapon, disguised as a gift. At home, the plan took shape. The kitchen was quiet, Zoe asleep upstairs, her laughter from earlier a fleeting warmth against the chill of Kevin's presence. He sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone, his resentment palpable since their last argument. Brianna moved deliberately, placing her sketch pad on the counter, the flawed atrium design prominently displayed. She lingered, pretending to tidy, knowing Kevin's eyes would find it. "You're still working on that project?" he asked, his voice edged with disdain. "Thought your boss took it over." She shrugged, her tone carefully defeated. "Just some ideas. They don't matter anymore." Kevin's gaze flicked to the sketch, his jaw tightening. She saw the spark, his need to control her, to pull her back to the wife he wanted, not the designer she'd become. "Looks fancy," he muttered, snapping a photo with his phone before she could notice. Brianna turned away, hiding a flicker of satisfaction. She knew he'd send it to Edward, hoping to undermine her, to prove she was out of her depth. It was exactly what she wanted. Kevin's jealousy, once her cage, was now her lever. The next day, Edward called her into his office, his demeanor smug as he waved a printout of her sketch. "This came to my attention," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, bold but unpolished. "Still, there's potential." Brianna lowered her eyes, playing the part of the chastened subordinate. "I was just experimenting," she murmured. "It's not finished." Edward's smile widened, a predator sensing weakness. "Good thing I saw it. I'll refine it for the final plans." "You're learning, Brianna." She nodded, her heart pounding with quiet triumph. He'd taken the bait, blind to the flaw that would expose him. Back at her desk, Brianna's facade held firm, but her mind raced. She reviewed the Title 24 regulations, confirming the composite's fatal incompatibility. Edward, in his rush to claim another victory, wouldn't check the codes. His arrogance was her ally. Leo passed by, his eyes catching hers with a question. She gave a subtle shake of her head, signaling silence. His support had awakened her, but this was her fight. She couldn't risk his internship further. The office hummed around her, oblivious to the storm she was brewing. That night, alone in her home office, Brianna stood before a mirror, practicing her delivery. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice steady, "can you confirm the atrium's compliance with Title 24? The words were simple, but their precision was lethal. She imagined the conference room, the investors' faces, Edward's confidence crumbling. Her reflection stared back, no longer the woman who'd stumbled from the rooftop party. She was a force, her resolve forged in betrayal, her plan a blueprint for justice. The Chicago skyline glittered outside, its lights a mirror to her growing fire. The final Aura meeting loomed, a stage where Edward's hubris would meet her strategy. Kevin's photo, Edward's theft, both were threads in a web she'd woven. She didn't know if it would be enough, but she knew she'd fight. Her sketches lay beside her, the flawed atrium a silent promise of reckoning, waiting to strike. The conference room at Sterling and Wright was a crucible of ambition, its glass walls amplifying the Chicago skyline's relentless glow. Brianna sat at the polished table, her notebook open, her fingers steady despite the pulse hammering in her chest. Weeks of Edward Vance's betrayal, stealing her aura design, dismissing her creativity, had led to this moment. Her trap, a deliberately flawed atrium sketch sent by Kevin to Edward, lay hidden in the final plans. She'd rehearsed her strike, a single question about Title 24 compliance, practiced in the mirror until it was a blade. Today, Edward's arrogance would meet her precision, and she would reclaim her voice. The room filled with executives, investors, and designers, their faces a sea of white privilege, their murmurs buzzing with anticipation for the Aura Eco Resort's final presentation. Edward stood at the front, 49, his confidence a polished veneer as he clicked through slides. "This atrium," he declared, projecting the flawed design Brianna had crafted, "is the heart of Aura, sleek, sustainable, revolutionary." The composite panels gleamed on the screen, a siren's call of beauty doomed by their failure to meet California's earthquake safety standards. Investors nodded, their pens scratching notes, unaware of the fault line running through Edward's triumph. Brianna's heart raced, but her face remained calm, her eyes fixed on Edward. She thought of the rooftop party, Kevin's humiliating grip, Edward's cold gaze, of Leo's risky revelation, exposing Edward's theft, of her nights sketching a trap while Kevin's jealousy played into her hands. She'd been a shadow in her own life, silenced at work, controlled at home, but no more. Edward's voice droned on, praising his vision, each word a spark to her smoldering resolve. As he concluded, the room erupted in applause, the sound a hollow echo of her stolen dreams. "Any questions?" Edward asked, his smile smug, his eyes skimming the room. Brianna raised her hand, her movement deliberate, her voice cutting through the fading claps. "Mr. Vance," she said, her tone clear and measured, Can you confirm the atrium's compliance with California's Title 24 earthquake safety standards? The room stilled, a collective breath held. Edward's smile faltered, a crack in his facade. Of course, he said, his voice tightening. It's been thoroughly vetted. But his eyes darted to the slide, a flicker of doubt betraying him. Brianna pressed forward, her voice steady as steel. The composite panels, aren't they rated below Title 24's seismic requirements? A critical oversight for a California project. The silence deepened, heavy as stone. An engineer at the table leaned forward, frowning, flipping through his notes. She's right, he muttered, his voice rising. Those materials don't meet code. Whispers spread, investors exchanging glances, their confidence unraveling. Edward's face paled, his hands gripping the podium. There must be a mistake, he stammered. But the room's eyes were on Brianna now. She stood, her long, wavy hair catching the light as she clicked to her original design. A flawless atrium, compliant and visionary. This, she said, her voice commanding, is the design I submitted, fully aligned with Title 24. It's sustainable, cost-effective, and ready for aura. The room shifted, murmurs turning to nods, eyes widening with respect. An investor spoke up. Why wasn't this presented? Edward opened his mouth, but no words came. His theft, his arrogance, lay exposed, a house of cards collapsing under Brianna's precision. The meeting ended with a directive. Brianna would lead Aura's redesign. As colleagues filed out, their whispers now of her brilliance, Edward lingered, his gaze hollow. She met his eyes, unflinching, no longer the woman he'd dismissed. Leo caught her eye from across the room, his nod a quiet affirmation of her victory. She'd turned his evidence into a weapon, and now she stood taller, her place undeniable. As she left the conference room, the Chicago skyline stretched before her, its lights no longer a challenge but a mirror of her fire. Yet her triumph felt incomplete. Kevin's betrayal, sending her sketch to Edward, echoed in her mind, a reminder of the cage waiting at home. She'd won this battle, but her marriage, her future, loomed unresolved. Her phone buzzed, Kevin's name on the screen. But she let it ring, her steps steady toward the elevator. She'd designed her moment of justice. Now she'd designed her freedom. The Chicago skyline shimmered beyond the glass walls of Sterling and Wright, but Brianna's victory in the conference room still echoed in her mind. Exposing Edward Vance's theft with a single, precise question about Title 24 had turned the firm's gaze from his arrogance to her brilliance. She'd reclaimed her aura design, her voice, her place as the only black woman at her level. Yet, as she stepped into her new office, now hers as Aura's project lead, the weight of her triumph felt incomplete. Kevin's betrayal, sending her flawed sketch to Edward, lingered like a shadow. Her professional battle was won, but the cage of her marriage still loomed, its bars forged in jealousy and control. At home that evening, the air was thick with tension. Kevin sat on the couch, his eyes fixed on the TV, but his silence screamed louder than any argument. Brianna stood in the kitchen, Zoe's crayons scattered across the table, her daughter's laughter from upstairs a fragile thread of light. We need to talk, Brianna said, her voice steady, cutting through the hum of the news. Kevin's gaze flicked to her, sharp and defensive. About what? Your big win at work? His tone dripped with resentment, as if her success diminished him. She took a breath, her resolve hardened by months of his accusations, his grip at the rooftop party, his sabotage with Edward. I'm filing for divorce, she said, the words a quiet thunder. Kevin's face twisted, shock giving way to anger. You're throwing us away for your career? He spat. After everything I've done for you? Brianna didn't flinch. You humiliated me, Kevin. You tried to break me. This isn't a marriage, it's a prison. She turned away, her heart pounding but unyielding. The next day she met with a lawyer, presenting evidence. Text messages, the photo he'd sent to Edward, and security footage from the party. Kevin's actions, once her shame, were now her shield. The divorce papers were filed, a first step toward freedom. At Sterling and Wright, Brianna's triumph reshaped her world. The firm's leadership, chastened by Edward's exposure, named her Aura's project lead, her designs now guiding the eco-resort's future. But she saw beyond her own victory. The whispers in the office, colleagues who'd once doubted her, now praising her, revealed a deeper truth. Talent like hers, marginalized by race and gender, needed more than one win. She proposed a diversity and inclusion initiative, a program to mentor young designers, especially those overlooked by the firm's elite. The board approved it, and Brianna found herself mentoring Leo, the intern whose courage had sparked her fight. "You changed things," he said one afternoon, his eyes bright with admiration. She smiled, her voice soft but firm. "We're just starting." Her new life took root in a modest Chicago apartment, its plain walls and creaky floors a stark contrast to the sterile luxury of her old home. Zoe's laughter filled the space, her drawings pinned to the fridge, each one a burst of color against the beige. Brianna's mother helped unpack boxes, her sister brought groceries, their presence a quiet anchor. One evening after Zoe's bedtime, Brianna stepped onto the balcony, her long, wavy hair catching the cool evening breeze. The city skyline stretched before her, its lights no longer a challenge but a canvas, reflecting the life she was building. She'd lost so much, her marriage, her old dreams, but gained more. Strength, freedom, a future she'd designed herself. Zoe bounded out, clutching a drawing, her eyes sparkling. "Mom, look," she said, holding up a sketch of two figures, mother and daughter, in front of a house with flowers. "It's us, in our new home." Brianna's heart swelled, the weight of her journey settling into something warm, whole. She knelt, pulling Zoe into a hug. "It's perfect, baby," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We're enough." The words were a vow, a promise to her daughter, to herself. Zoe giggled, unaware of the battles fought, but safe in the peace Brianna had carved. The divorce proceedings began, and Kevin's anger was no match for the evidence stacked against him. Brianna led Aura with clarity, her team following her not out of fear but respect. She stood on that balcony often, a cup of tea in hand, the city's hum a reminder of her resilience. She'd been humiliated, betrayed, silenced, but she'd rebuilt herself, not as a victim, but as an architect of her fate. Zoe's drawings, her team's trust, the skyline's glow, they were her new blueprint, a life free and unyielding, hers to shape. Brianna's journey, from humiliation to triumph, from betrayal to freedom, reminds us that resilience can redesign even the darkest moments. Her story is yours to carry, so share your thoughts below. What moved you? What sparked your fire? Drop a comment with your city or vibe, and let's keep this Storytime family growing. Thank you from the heart for listening to every twist and triumph. Your support lights up our skyline. Subscribe for more stories that inspire, and we'll meet you back here soon, ready to craft new worlds together. Until then, keep designing your own blueprint for strength. See you next time.